My mom took $14,000 from my savings. I paid off your brother's car loan, be grateful, she said. I just nodded. Got it. 10 minutes later, my uncle called. Where's the money I asked you to hold for me? Her face went white. I leaned in and whispered something. Within minutes, my uncle's attorney was knocking on our door. I never thought it would come to this, me turning into some sort of enemy in my own family. All because I helped my uncle when he asked, and because I'd always helped my mom, even though she had a way of getting under my skin like no one else. She was unpredictable. Sometimes she could be generous to a fault, other times she'd do something so out of line it made me wonder if she saw me as her son or just a resource to tap into whenever she pleased. Over the years, I'd gotten used to her small intrusions, borrowing a few hundred from my dresser, taking my car without asking, even giving away some of my things to relatives she thought needed them more. I told myself it was easier to let it slide than start a war over it. But nothing prepared me for this one. That Thursday, I came home from work, ready to grab something to eat and relax. She was already in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of tea, acting like she just solved the family's biggest crisis. Without any build-up, she told me she had taken all the money from my safe. $14,000. She explained it like it was some noble act. She'd used the entire sum to pay off my brother's car loan. Apparently, he'd been missing payments, and she didn't want his credit destroyed. Then she looked at me and said I should be grateful she had the initiative to help our family. The safe had been my pride. I'd bought it myself, fireproof and locked with a code only I knew. The cash inside wasn't just savings from my job, it was side hustle money, tools I'd sold, and even a few old collectibles I'd traded for cash. Every bill had its own little story. And 5,000 of it wasn't even mine. My uncle had given me that amount in cash a month ago, asking me to hold it for him until a deal he was working on went through. I didn't blow up. I didn't even raise my voice. I just nodded once and said, "Understood." She took that as acceptance, probably thinking she'd gotten away with it. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. My uncle's name lit up the screen. His voice was direct. He wanted to know where his money was. Not my money, his. The way he said it made it clear he already suspected something was wrong. I glanced at my mom while answering. She froze, her hands wrapped tight around her teacup. As soon as I said the cash was gone, the color drained from her face. She had clearly forgotten that not all of it was mine. For a few seconds, the kitchen went silent except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. Then I ended the call, walked over to her, and leaned in close so only she could hear me. I whispered a short sentence, just enough to remind her that she hadn't just crossed me, she'd crossed him. Her hands trembled. She knew what that meant. My uncle didn't handle losses through family talks or polite apologies. 2 minutes later, her phone lit up with his name. She didn't answer. 8 minutes after that, there was a knock at the front door, sharp, deliberate, and nothing like a neighbor dropping by. I opened it. Standing there wasn't my uncle. It was his attorney. And that's when I realized the real storm was just about to start. The man at the door didn't waste time with pleasantries. Early 40s, sharp suit, eyes that scanned the room like he was cataloging every detail. He introduced himself as my uncle's attorney, but he didn't offer a handshake. Instead, he handed me a business card so crisp it looked like it had just come from the printer, then asked where my mother was. I stepped aside. He walked in without hesitation, like he already knew the layout of the place. My mom was still at the kitchen table, tea gone cold, her fingers curled around the cup like it was the only thing keeping her steady. He stopped in front of her and set a slim folder on the table. The sound it made was small but deliberate, the kind of sound that tells you the person holding it knows exactly what they're doing. Without sitting down, he opened it and began reading. Dates. Amounts. Specific bills. Even the serial numbers. My uncle had kept an exact record of the cash he'd given me. It was all in there, neat as a bank ledger. I didn't know he tracked it like that. To me, it was just an envelope of money he wanted. Kept safe. To him, it was an asset under tight surveillance. The attorney read without pausing, then looked up and asked a simple question. Where was the money now? My mom tried to soften it. She said it had gone toward a pressing family matter. The kind of vague phrase she'd used my whole life whenever she wanted to end a conversation before it began. The attorney didn't even blink. He said my uncle wasn't interested in what she considered pressing. The arrangement had been clear. The money stayed untouched until he called for it. She shifted tactics. She leaned back, trying to sound casual, suggesting that surely family could work this out without dragging in lawyers. The attorney didn't smile, didn't look away. He said plainly that this wasn't about family. It was about property that had been taken without consent. And then he used the word theft. That word changed the air in the room. My mom's head turned toward me like I was the one who'd made things escalate. Her eyes narrowed just a little, the way they did when she was looking for someone else to carry the blame. The attorney didn't give her the chance. He reached into the folder and slid a document across the table. It was a formal demand for repayment, $5,000, plus a penalty for the delay, due within 72 hours. If it wasn't met, he said, my uncle would have no choice but to escalate the matter. She stared at the paper, then at him, then back at the paper. The silence stretched. Finally, she asked what escalate meant. He didn't elaborate. He just closed the folder, put it back under his arm, and walked to the door. When it clicked shut behind him, the house felt smaller. My mom didn't look at me. She just sat there with the demand in front of her, muttering words I couldn't catch. But I knew the signs. She wasn't planning to pay him back. She was already thinking of ways to twist this, to make it my responsibility, to spin it so my uncle's anger landed on me instead of her. I didn't say a word. But I'd seen enough of her tactics over the years to know one thing. She was about to make her move, and when she did, it would be aimed directly at me. The next morning, the house felt wrong. It wasn't just quiet, it was the kind of silence where you know conversations have already been happening without you. My mom moved around the kitchen like I wasn't there, putting dishes away a little too loudly, scrolling through her phone with this fixed expression. Not angry. Not nervous. Just busy. I knew what that meant. She was working. Not the kind of work that earns a paycheck, the kind where she builds her version of a story before you have the chance to tell yours. By 9 o'clock, my phone rang. It was my uncle. He didn't even start with hello. His voice was tight, measured, like he was trying to sound reasonable but couldn't keep the edge out. He said he talked to my mom. And just like that, I knew exactly how my day was going to go. According to him, the problem wasn't that my mom had taken the money. The problem was that I had failed to safeguard it. That's how he put it, like I was some incompetent guard who'd fallen asleep on the job. He said my mom had explained that she'd been forced to use the cash because I hadn't been clear about what portion belonged to him. That was a nice little twist. He was the one who insisted I keep the whole thing quiet. No one else needed to know it was his exact words. But now that detail had been erased. I didn't interrupt him. I didn't bother defending myself. I just let him talk, storing away every word. He said he was trying to be fair, but couldn't ignore the fact that, in his view, I'd mishandled things. Then came the part I'd been waiting for. He said he and my mom had agreed that it was better to handle this between us, rather than making it into something bigger. That was code for we're going to corner you into taking the blame. By lunchtime, it was clear they'd been busy. My cousin Sarah called, just to check in. Her tone was sweet enough, but her questions weren't innocent. She asked if I'd found the missing money yet, and if I regretted not telling anyone it was Uncle's. That's when I knew she'd already been briefed, just enough for her to think she was getting the truth. Then my aunt left a voicemail, saying she hoped I'd learned from this, and that family comes first. Another cousin texted me asking if I'd sorted things out with Mom yet. None of them were asking because they wanted to hear my side. They were calling to reinforce the version they'd already been told. By the end of the day, I'd counted 6 calls, 3 texts, and 1 Facebook message from a relative I barely spoke to, all with the same undertone: we've heard the story, and it's your fault. I didn't correct them. Not yet. If there's one thing I've learned from dealing with my family, it's that sometimes you get more power by letting people believe they've got you cornered. They relax. They start making mistakes. They talk too much. And when you've got people like my mom and my uncle, who thrive on controlling the narrative, you wait until they've told it so many times that they can't backpedal when you dismantle it in front of everyone. That's exactly what I was planning. By the time the last call ended, I had already started building my file. The text from my uncle when he gave me the cash. The handwritten note he left in the envelope. A time-stamped photo of the safe, taken the day before my mom emptied it. Even the receipt from when I bought the safe, because I knew she'd eventually claim it wasn't secure. I wasn't going to defend myself in whispers. I was going to wait until the right moment, with the right audience, and drop everything in one shot. And the best part? I already knew when that moment was coming. The moment I'd been waiting for came quicker than I'd planned. Saturday morning, my mom called and said there was going to be a family dinner at Aunt Linda's place. She made it sound casual, almost cheerful, but I caught the choice of words. She said everyone's going to be there, so we can clear the air. I've been in this family long enough to know what that means, a staged ambush. Get as many people in the room as possible, control the narrative, and leave me outnumbered. It wasn't about clearing the air. It was about locking the room and filling it with smoke I couldn't breathe through. I said I'd come, and I made sure my own preparation was airtight. The file I'd been building was on my phone, on my laptop, and in the cloud. I printed hard copies too. If they wanted a spectacle, I'd make sure the ending wasn't theirs to write. When I arrived, the smell of roast chicken and baked potatoes filled the house, but the air felt tight. Conversations dropped a notch when I stepped into the dining room. My uncle was seated at the far end of the table, my mom right next to him. They weren't tense. They were comfortable, almost smug, like two lawyers walking into court with a case they thought was already won. Dinner started with small talk. Work, weather, who'd gotten engaged recently. But it was the kind of talk where everyone's eyes keep sliding back to you, waiting. Halfway through the meal, the shift came. My uncle put down his fork, cleared his throat, and looked around the table. He began slowly, like he was making sure each person was following along. He said there'd been a misunderstanding involving money he'd entrusted to me. His version was neat and rehearsed. He gave me a large sum. I failed to keep it secure, and my mom had to step in to resolve the crisis. At the right moments, my mom added her commentary, how I hadn't been clear about the ownership of the money, how she'd made a difficult decision to prevent a bigger problem, how unfortunate it was that things had become complicated. It was a well-rehearsed duet. I let them talk. The longer they went, the more confident they got, and the more certain I was that they trapped themselves in the rhythm of their own lies. When my uncle finally leaned back, satisfied that the table had absorbed their version, I spoke up. I said I wanted to add a few details, and I reached into my bag. The first stack of papers went to my cousin Sarah, then the next Aunt Linda, and so on around the table. 3 pages each. Page 1 was a screenshot of my uncle's text telling me to keep the money secret. Page 2 was a photo of the safe, sealed and intact, time-stamped the day before my mom emptied it. Page 3 was the handwritten note my uncle had left in the envelope when he gave me the cash. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The sound of pages being turned and read in silence was louder than any argument. I laid out the actual timeline. No dramatics, no side comments. Just facts. When I finished, I sat back and waited. That's when something I hadn't planned for happened. Aunt Linda leaned forward, pointing at the note. She said she recognized the handwriting, not just because it was his, but because she had received a nearly identical envelope from him last year. Same neat print, same wording, same instructions to keep it safe. And say nothing to anyone. At first, I thought she meant it as a joke. But then my cousin Sarah's face changed. She said she'd been given an envelope 2 months ago, with the same kind of instructions. She hadn't told anyone because she assumed it was a one-time thing. In less than a minute, the spotlight moved. People weren't looking at me anymore. They were looking at my uncle. The room shifted fast. My uncle tried to laugh it off, calling it just how I do things. But his voice wasn't steady anymore. My mom stepped in to defend him, saying the situations were different. But the more she talked, the more obvious it became that she'd been helping him keep these little arrangements going. And now, with multiple family members realizing they'd been part of the same game, the mood changed from judgment to suspicion. But it was aimed at them, not me. I didn't push it further. I didn't have to. The room was already doing the work for me. Still, as the evening wound down, I caught my uncle watching me with an expression I hadn't seen before. It wasn't embarrassment. It was calculation. And in that moment I knew something important. This wasn't over. If anything, the real fight was about to begin. The quiet lasted exactly 2 days. That's all the time my uncle and my mom needed to regroup. After the scene at Aunt Linda's, I knew they'd retreat, lick their wounds, and come back with something more deliberate. People like them don't just accept being embarrassed in front of the family. They rewrite the narrative until the humiliation belongs to someone else. The first sign came on Tuesday morning. A guy I used to work with called me out of the blue. We hadn't spoken in months, so I was surprised he even had my number saved. He said he'd heard I was going through money troubles and might be looking to sell off some of my tools and equipment. I told him no, but I asked where he'd heard that. He hesitated before saying, "Your uncle mentioned it at the diner yesterday." I knew immediately what that was, bait. My uncle wasn't trying to help me sell anything. He was planting seeds in the community, making me sound desperate, reckless, or careless with money. The more people repeated it, the more it would feel like truth. By that afternoon, another sign. My landlord texted me to say he'd gotten a strange phone call. The person on the other end claimed to be handling a family legal matter and wanted to verify if I was behind on rent or if I was keeping large amounts of cash in my apartment. They wouldn't give their name, and my landlord didn't press. But I didn't need a name. That was my uncle's style, vague authority, just enough detail to sound official, but not enough to be traced back cleanly. Wednesday morning, my mom showed up at my door. She had a grocery bag in her arms, wearing that concerned mother expression she used whenever she wanted to look like the hero in her own story. She said she'd heard I might lose my job soon and wanted to make sure I had food. I asked her where she heard that. She changed the subject. I let her put the groceries away, because I already knew the play. Within a week, she'd be telling relatives she was helping me through a rough patch, reinforcing the idea that I was unstable and needed rescuing. But the move that caught me off guard came on Thursday night. My phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The man on the other end said he was from a local collections agency and that they had an account in my name, $3,200. That was overdue. When I told him I'd never taken out that account, he rattled off an address I hadn't lived at in years. My mom's old house. The account had been opened 3 months ago. The date of birth on file was mine, but off by 2 days. The signature was a shaky version of my own, not close enough to pass under scrutiny, but close enough to cause a headache. I asked for copies of all documents, and he agreed to send them. That's when I realized my uncle and mom had changed tactics. They weren't just trying to discredit me within the family, they were starting to plant paper trails. They wanted to make me look like the kind of person who couldn't be trusted with money anywhere, not just in our house. They were smart about it too. A fake debt here, a rumor there, a few concerned phone calls to people who knew me. Nothing big enough for police to take seriously on its own. But stacked together? It was a character assassination in slow motion. The problem for them was that I'd already started my own counterattack. I called a friend from high school who now worked in cybersecurity. I told him about the fake account and asked if he could do some digging. Within a few hours, he traced the IP address used to file the fraudulent account. It had come from a personal email address, one that had also been receiving encrypted messages from my uncle's business account for the past 2 weeks. It wasn't just sloppy. It was reckless. And if I wanted, I could drop it all into the hands of law enforcement right now. But part of me didn't want to end it that way. Police reports are clean, cold, and impersonal. My uncle and my mom thrived on image, their place in the family, their reputation in town. Taking them apart in the same arena they'd chosen, in front of the people they wanted to fool, would be a much sharper knife. And the perfect opportunity was already on the horizon. Aunt Linda's birthday was coming up in 2 weeks. Everyone would be there. They'd think they'd silenced me by then. But I was planning something they wouldn't see coming. Aunt Linda's birthday landed on a Saturday. By the time I arrived, the living room was packed, cousins on the couch, uncles in the kitchen, kids running through the hall. My mom and uncle were already there, side by side, laughing with a small group near the buffet table. They didn't even glance my way when I walked in. That was fine. They wouldn't be laughing for long. The first hour was harmless, cake, presents, the usual small talk. But I noticed how my mom and uncle worked the rooms separately, talking in low voices to different relatives. They were still reinforcing their version of events, probably figuring I'd keep my head down to avoid ruining a birthday party. I waited until after dinner, when Aunt Linda insisted everyone gather in the living room for coffee. That's when I pulled a small folder from my bag and set it on the coffee table. I told them I had something important to say and that it wouldn't take long. They didn't like that. My uncle leaned back, crossing his arms, and my mom gave me the same tight smile she used whenever she thought I was about to embarrass myself. I started with the money. I explained exactly what happened with my uncle's $5,000, the texts he sent telling me to keep it secret, the time-stamped photo of the safe, the note he left with the cash. I passed the copies around so everyone could see for themselves. Then I moved to what happened after. The rumors about me selling equipment. The concerned calls to my landlord. The fake debt account tied to my mom's old address. Each item came with proof, call logs, emails, and in the case of the debt, the paperwork with the incorrect date of birth and the forged signature. I let the silence hang just long enough for the weight of it to settle. Then I handed out one last page, the IP trace report my friend had put together, showing the account had been opened from an email address linked directly to my uncle, which had been in regular encrypted contact with my mom. The room went still. My uncle started to speak, but Aunt Linda cut him off. She looked right at him and asked why his personal financial issues seemed to involve setting up fake debts in my name. My mom tried to say she had nothing to do with it, but then my cousin Sarah pointed out that the forged account had been tied to her address. It unraveled fast after that. The questions came from every side, and for once, my mom didn't have quick answers. My uncle's voice got louder, but the more he defended himself, the more defensive he looked. I didn't push for an apology. I didn't need one. The point was made. Everyone in that room had seen the proof with their own eyes, and there was no version of the story my mom or uncle could tell now that wouldn't sound like a desperate cover-up. By the time I left, they were sitting together in the corner, isolated. Not speaking to each other. Not speaking to anyone. In the weeks that followed, the calls stopped. No more rumors, no more mysterious phone inquiries, no more concerned visits. I made it clear that if they came at me again, I had no problem going public, and this time, it wouldn't just be family who saw it. They haven't tried to take from me since. And while the family will never be the same, I can live with that. Because now they know, I'm not the one you can use. I'm the one who keeps receipts. The update. A few months passed after Aunt Linda's birthday. Life was quieter, almost eerily so. My mom kept her distance, and my uncle avoided me entirely. Word had spread through the family that things were resolved, though no one could quite agree on what that meant. I'd moved on. Or at least I thought I had. Then, one Wednesday evening, I got an unexpected email from my friend in cybersecurity, the same one who traced the fake debt account back to my uncle. He said he'd been going through some old flag data and found something I might want to see. It was another set of encrypted emails between my uncle and my mom, dated months before the whole $14,000 incident. One thread stood out. In it, they weren't talking about my money at all. They were discussing, consolidating, cash from a few other relatives. They mentioned specific amounts, people's schedules, even where those relatives kept their safes. And then there was a line from my mom that hit harder than anything I'd read before. Thomas is predictable. He won't make a scene until he's ready to drop proof, so as long as we're careful, we can work around him. I sat there staring at it, realizing the $14,000 wasn't just some impulsive decision to help my brother. It was part of a much bigger pattern, one I'd only seen a corner of. They'd been running a family-wide game for years, moving money around, covering their tracks by blaming whoever they could. I wasn't the first target. I'd just been the first one to push back hard enough to stop it. I saved everything. Every email, every attachment. I didn't confront them. Not yet. Because the way I see it, sooner or later they'll slip again. And when they do, I won't need to spend months building a case. I'll already have one waiting. Until then, I'm keeping quiet. Let them think the storm's over. They don't know the real storm hasn't even started.